All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Raul Singh, and I am one of the executives at the Anand Corporation. Today's presentation is on connecting online business software. Our firm helps businesses streamline information to be more efficient, organize information to be smarter, and unify it for quicker use and access. How do we solve problems? We try to answer the following questions. What are you trying to do? That's where we begin with. We're not in the business of pushing any tools or software. We're in the business of solving problems. And sometimes it's not a technology problem. What is stopping you? Generally, when somebody asks us to help them with technology, there's an impediment. What have others done and won? There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. If there are success stories and case studies out in the industry, we try to leverage the best practice. And then finally, we try to figure out the options. Sometimes, dependent on budget or resource constraints or time constraints, we have to pick the right thing for the right time and the right place. Not every solution is appropriate. And then finally, what do we recommend? That's where we try to understand the business goals and recommend the best thing today that could be leveraged in the future as well. So today we're going to first review a little bit about how to understand your business in terms of whether connecting internet software or connecting online business software makes sense for you. We'll talk about connecting existing technology and why people would be interested in doing that. How do we launch the app? So essentially any integration or connection between two different pieces of software is also another application. And actually it's backward. I will be covering a lot of tools that exist, open source, commercial, software as a service options. And my goal is to cover as much as I can, and if there's some time, we'll do some Q&A. And of course, we're available to chat offline. We take a people-oriented approach to technology. On the left here, you see that people are the most important aspect of the business. People, they are the business, and they are coordinated by business leaders and organizational leaders to execute a set of processes or institutional habits. And what information helps with is to help the team or the organization execute those processes better. And then finally, systems serve information. Systems are used to coordinate information. And at the same time, as systems are at the bottom of this inverse pyramid, systems are also in the middle, connecting people, processes, and information. But if you start saying, this is the system, and it's going to help your organization do something, then you really miss out on what the goals are. And the goals are really to help solve problems for your organization. Why would people go into looking at connecting online business software? Well, first, let's review what we covered in the last webinar, which is how is online software made in the first place. So generally, online software consists of a lot of different components. And as a system, it's maybe connected to different systems, and that's what we're going to talk about. It generally has a database of some sort. It has software logic, and it has an interface. Maybe it's not just web or desktop. Maybe it has a mobile interface, an Android interface, an iOS interface. And the main issue that comes up is once people start using software, they tend to start using another piece of software that serves another function. And one of the major use cases for connecting online software is when something happens in software A, then do something in software B. So an example is when I convert a lead into a client in our customer relationship software, then automatically synchronize that information to the accounting system to create a new customer there. And at the same time, automatically put them into the project management system so that I don't have to essentially do data entry. That's one of the very simple use cases. So synchronizing information is something that small companies can use, and large companies, they do it in a more advanced way. It's called master data management, which is to have one single source of record that is used to synchronize everything else. But ultimately, the fundamentals are the same. Connecting online software, or connecting software, generally speaking, is about reducing data entry, automating processes that people would have to have done manually, and maybe it's to gather knowledge in one place to do some sort of search or business intelligence. But what we're going to cover today is what are the tools out there that can help, and what are the pros and cons. And at the very end of our presentation, I'm going to do a very simple integration with an off-the-shelf online software that doesn't require any programming, and maybe that'll get you started. But as your organization grows, you may have to look into the other options. Just a quick review. A lot of online software has an interface, and some integrations really impact the front end of software. We're not going to talk about that today. We're really going to focus a little bit about software integration, how database data could be moved between systems, and we're going to talk about connecting internet software at the infrastructure level or at the platform level. We're not going to talk about traditional IT because we're an internet-oriented company, and we help companies get transformed to become modern enterprises. This slide basically, again, it's a review from last time. There are so many pieces of online software out there that can help you do something. For example, if I zoom in here, I can't really zoom in here, but Cvent is used to publish events and charge for them. Or Jive is used to create online communities. Or let's say Salesforce is used for CRM. As a small company, it makes sense to start subscribing to these pieces of software, but eventually, as I mentioned earlier, you may want to connect them. The first type of online tools that are available to connect or integrate are meant for non-technical people, for non-developers. And this is great. If you're a small business owner or you're in a team in a larger organization and you have some flexibility to use certain online tools, you don't necessarily have to rely on the internal IT team or an external IT team. With these tools, with a little bit of learning, you can put together basic recipes. Zapier is one of the more famous ones meant for businesses. If this then that is meant really for more personal information moving, but it could be used for businesses as well. Cloud Pipes is a Zapier competitor. We're actually going to do a demo on Zapier later. And then there's a site called CloudWork, which shows applications and what they are already connected to. And that's useful if you don't even want to do an integration. If you just want to connect, if you want to use software that's already connected, you're going to save time by not doing it in the first place. The second most common scenario for connecting online software is to do it yourself, to program something. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but sometimes what could have been done with a $20 per month plan with Zapier, you're going to end up paying $500 to an external developer or that much of a internal developer's time to put something together. There is sometimes a very good reason to do this, which is if something like Zapier or Cloud Pipes can't move your information, transform it in the way you want it, then you have to put in custom logic. And the tools I mentioned earlier, they don't really allow you to do too much custom programming, but rather just move information. So Spring in the Java world and Rhino ETL on the .NET world, they're basically frameworks to move data. There's a lot of programming and piping that one has to do, but at the very least, it gives people a framework to do basically pipelines of processes. There are other service buses that can help custom programs be more efficient and get bigger and bigger and handle more stress. Of course, each programming framework has all the tools necessary to connect internet software, but if you don't use one of the libraries that is readily available to you, then you end up reinventing the wheel unnecessarily. And then finally, Apache Spark, Apache Beam, and Apache Flink are open source data processing frameworks, which are at the same time used to crunch lots of data, but can also be used to move information. Larger organizations, and I think some small organizations that realize what software integration platforms on the cloud can do, they start to look at tools like Elastic.io. By the way, Elastic.io is separate and completely different from Elasticsearch. Dell Boomi is an integration cloud provided by Dell. They bought a company called Boomi. SnapLogic has been around as one of the first cloud integration providers. Informatica, it's actually a very old company. They're generally expensive, but they've been around for such a long time. They have a lot of connectors with existing software. But what these companies provide is a infrastructure to connect software on the cloud, where you don't necessarily need to have servers or virtual machines on the cloud. You or your team only needs to provide the logic. And the benefits here are that if something fails, the system will continue to try to do it again. It'll notify you. And each of them are, this, I think, Elastic.io is in the realm of, let's say, 300 UK pounds per month versus something like Informatica will be probably $5,000 a month. It really depends what you are trying to do as an organization. And we'll talk about why this method would be better than, for example, doing it custom, or why using an online developer-centric software as a service for integration is better than a non-developer one. There are also open source integration tools for technical people. Unfortunately, there aren't, that I am aware of, there aren't any open source tools for connecting internet software that are just meant for non-technical people. Whereas, and you'll notice this, I've highlighted that these tools are easily usable by software developers. The open source tools generally require a slightly higher level skill set, some engineering talent rather than just pure development talent, or some architecture talent, because it's a big picture problem, and where this open source system is really a part of a larger framework. Huygen is pronounced, it's spelled Huggin, but it's pronounced Huygen. Huygen is built on Ruby on Rails. It has a idea to be something like Zapier. When something happens here, run this command here or move this data here. But it takes a little bit of effort to set it up. It doesn't have too many connectors, but it's useful. Pentaho is primarily a business intelligence tool, which is open source, but it also has an integration framework. Business intelligence tools that don't have an integration framework are pretty much useless. If you can't get the data in one place, then how are you going to be able to visualize it? MuleSoft are two leaders in open source integration software. MuleSoft is grown, has probably 300 connectors now. They also offer commercial versions. Actually, Pentaho does as well. They offer commercial versions of their software, and they also offer software as a service versions of their software. So they pretty much are in the same. Their SaaS offerings are in the same world as SnapLogic or Dell Boomi, but maybe a little bit cheaper. And then finally, Apache Camel has about 300 connectors. It's completely open source, but it requires heavy understanding of Java or Scala to get it to work. And then, of course, last but not least, there are commercial integration tools require the same level of knowledge as an architect or a software engineer, and they come in different price ranges. Neuron ESB, at least in this group, being the cheapest, and I think the next would be BizTalk, and then either Informatica, and then finally TIBCO. The type of companies that use TIBCO are companies like Ford, and I don't know exactly if they use it, but large organizations, Fortune 10, Fortune 50 companies would use TIBCO. Fortune 500 would use something like Informatica. Fortune 5000 would use BizTalk. And Neuron ESB is actually made by somebody that used to work on the BizTalk team. I know him personally. They're a small company. It's actually a spin-off of a consulting company that's been around for a long time. And they're versatile. The software can scale to large organizations, but it's also affordable for smaller teams. So as we covered these different tools, let's dig deeper into, what are some pros and cons of each? So simple software as a service, something like Zapier, obviously it's a low investment, something like an order of $20 or $50 a month. It's easy to set up and maintain. The cost is that as you grow in the number of transactions, that's what you are charged for. So if you are getting 50 customers or 100 customers a month, great. Start doing 500 transactions a day, probably not a best tool for that. It may just not be worth the money. Of course, you can just build that into your business model and not have to worry about it. But if you can reduce that cost by using something else, then that increases your profit margin. Advanced software as a service tools like Informatica Cloud or SnapLogic or Dell Boomi, they're tested for stress. The larger software like SAP and Oracle and Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics CRM may already be connected. They're enterprise grade. That means that they've already been used by large companies. Of course, they're expensive, and some of the software, some of the smaller software may not be connected because large companies may not be using software like Basecamp or Sugar CRM. So custom software, that means when you need something done, you hire a developer or you do it yourself, you connect two pieces of software with code. The obvious benefit here is that it does exactly what you want. However, if the API changes, API stands for Application Programming Interface, that's the endpoint that the piping that you create talks to. If the third-party provider changes it, then you have to go back and change your code. Advanced open source software, what I mentioned earlier, Apache Camel or Talend or MuleSoft, it's great. It's available for free. Some have more connectors than others. But the cons are that there's a mid to high learning curve, probably on the higher learning curve than mid. There are some tools that come and go. So there was a tool that I had mentioned in the last time I did this presentation about a few years ago called BIP.io. And I went to look at it this week just to see where that software is today. and turns out that the company has gone out of business. The company that was commercially supporting it has gone out of business. Luckily, the software is still available on GitHub, but it hasn't been updated since December of 2015. So there are some risks with open source software that's not well backed, either by a large community or by a commercial company that has viability. And then finally, advanced commercial software. Obviously, the greatest benefit here is that there's a company that's hopefully profitable and in business for a long time that's supporting it. So if anything goes wrong, if there's a bug, if APIs change, they update the connector and voila, it's working. Or they tell you, a month before the software is updated that, hey, these third-party providers are updating their API. We're going to be updating our software. Just be ready for the migration. And actually, if it's a software as a service, if it's an advanced software as a service, you don't even have to worry about the third-party API changing, because it'll just automatically be updated because it's on the cloud. They are expensive though, and there is a high learning curve. And I encourage you guys to if you're in the market, if you're talking to people, just if you're curious to see how these companies like Informatica and TIBCO, how rare these skills are. If you ask them, they'll tell you that there's only a few companies that, actually a lot of companies have the skill set. It's a very rare skill set, and it becomes expensive very quickly. So we talked about different options from simple to advanced, and reality is until you see an integration for real, you may not really understand what it gives you in terms of speed or time savings. So I'll just use one of our use cases. We use Zapier for some of the simple integrations because the time to, even though we have the programming skills, the time to develop the code initially, test it, and then maintain it for perpetuity it's just not worth it. And so I had an idea in the backlog. It was a tasker-in-chief application where I could, in one place, type in what needs to be done with a few tags, such as, oh, this is a sales task or this is an operations task, and it would automatically send it to the project management software, and it would assign it to somebody. And initially, I had this idea probably 2 or 3 years ago. I was like, you know what? This could be a great application that we could develop ourselves. And the more I started thinking about it, I was like, I don't think we really need to make that application. And earlier this summer, actually one of our apprentices, high school apprentices, did this exact use case. And she did not know any technology. I mean, she knew some technology, but she was not a very technical person. So this integration can be done by pretty much anybody with a high school education. So the use case is when somebody goes to a Slack channel, and Slack is a chat program, and types in an idea or a task, Zapier picks it up and sends it to Trello. And Trello is a project management software that's available on the internet. And based on a few keywords, if it's a sales and marketing or if it's a research and development task, it then moves it from that place into another lane. So if you haven't seen Slack, Zapier, or Trello, I'm going to be showing that to you now. So this is Slack, and it's a chat program, and we have a channel. It's a private channel called Chief, and this is Zapier. Zapier is where we can set up zaps. A zap is basically when something happens here, do X, Y, Z, and then do something in a second place. So the first zap is when something happens on Slack, send it to Trello. And then once it's in Trello, if it matches some criteria, send it to the right lane. And this is what Trello looks like. This is our inbox. The inbox project or the board has an inbox lane, and it has a lane for other areas in our team. So as a quick test, I'm going to just show you how it works, and then we can look into the Zap itself to see how it was configured. So we have a keyword that we're looking for. If I'm just talking here, hey guys, can't type today. This is a chat message. This message will not go into Trello. And the reason is that we don't want everything going into Trello. If we were just talking, that's okay. But if I put in a keyword, Trello, and I put in another keyword, let's say leadership and management, make a animated GIF explaining Zapier. And I'm just, leadership and management in our company actually consists of human capital development and HR. So creating knowledge is a leadership and management function. And I just want to put this in our backlog of ideas. Not immediately, but at some point, Zapier will pick this up and it will send it to Trello. Now, I don't have the luxury of waiting around for this, so I'll go in here and I'll just run this Zap. And it looked for some items, it found 2 cards, and it sent it to, and it created a card for me. Now, it found 2 potential cards, but it only put 1 in here that matched the keyword, right? We don't want to put everything in here. And because this is a leadership and management card, I want this to be moved to the leadership and management lane. I'm going to go ahead and run the LM Zap here. And it found 1 card and it moved it. So it's gone from here. Let's see. And moved to the leadership management lane. Now this is a very simple Zap for workflow, but you can see how just this simple workflow allows everybody in the company that's part of the channel here to add ideas for our company in the right place. And we could put in other Zaps that would move from these lanes into potentially some of the other boards in our company. Zapier actually can connect to lots of different software. And here are, let's see, if I get rid of Slack, this shows all the different recipes that are already created. So if you don't know how to make a Zap, which is pretty easy, there are other recipes that you can use. So send an email from Gmail when a webhook is received. What is a webhook? Webhook is basically when a piece of software sends data to another piece of software over the web. Here are some other ones. Create Trello cards from new Gmail emails. Create Trello cards from new spreadsheets rows. And if you sequence these different tools, you can automate probably 85 to 95% of any information moving across these pieces of software. So it's a really amazing toolkit. If you are using even 1 or 2 of these pieces of software, and more than likely you are, it's worth the trial. Again, we don't get paid any commission, and we're not a Zapier affiliate. We just love the software. It's great. So that's what Zapier is. Let's take a look at the Zap itself, so you can see how easy it is to make a Zap. So in this case, the trigger is from Slack, and we chose which that application is. We look for a specific event. So Zapier already knows the type of things that could happen on Slack. And there's more than 5 things. Well, apparently there's only 6 things. It uses the operations at anant.us Slack account. So it uses an organizational account, uses a private channel, and the trigger will get a new Slack message. The next step continues if that particular message starts with Trello, okay? And we can have other filters in here, and they're basically programming filters, but made easier to use with this GUI. You could also say the text must start with this, and it should have one of the team messages, team names, sales and marketing, leadership management, etc. And then finally, this Zap, the action that happens after the trigger and the filter is that it creates a new Trello card, and there are actually a lot more other options that you can do here. And the template it uses, it puts it in that board right here into the inbox list, and it uses the text that it found in step 1. And there's a lot of data actually available in step 1. The channel that it was coming from, if there were any attachments, who the user was, etc. But in our case, we don't really care about anything else except for the text. And if I wanted to assign somebody to the task, I could do that as well. If there were attachments on the Trello, we could also attach them. Sorry, attachments in the Slack message, we could also attach them here. So that's a demonstration of Slack channel connected to Trello using Zapier. I know that Aishani took probably a day or two to figure it out, but once she figured it out, she was able to add new zaps in probably 10 to 15 minutes. So it's worth looking into if you are trying to automate different tools. So before we go into questions and answers, go ahead and tell how we can help if you are interested in doing this, or you know somebody that's interested in doing this. Is that we curate what's out there. There's so many tools that come out all the time. We pick what works best. We try to leverage the cloud as much as possible because it's reliable and affordable. We are open source, and our clients basically pay us for our time. We offer maintenance. So as the solution that you're building, as it continues to grow, we can help you maintain code or configuration. And then we can also manage and support at a low all the way to a very high advisory level. So that's what we can help with. Go ahead and open up the floor for questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and if I need to use the screen again to bring up something on the browser, I'll do that. All right, so are there any questions from the audience? And feel free to speak. If you're muted, just unmute yourself. Or if you want to just ask a question. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a quick question. I was wondering if Zapier isn't able to, well, is Zapier able to be used for like an enterprise-wide type of integration, like who can handle a lot of data, or is it just made for rather small businesses? Like, is there another type of software that is Zapier for companies that are 200, 300, 500, 1,000 users?
Sure, that's a very good question. So Zapier itself can handle a lot of data because they handle a lot of data for a lot of different companies. But the frequency at which it works on depends on how much you pay. So if you go to, I'll go ahead and share the screen so you can see what I'm showing. And I'm going to log off here. Actually, let me do this. So if you look in the pricing, it explains, how frequently it moves information. I think it can move information probably once a minute, maybe a little bit faster. But where it breaks down is if you're doing tons and tons of transactions, it it may not be able to handle that stress just for you, because they're a software provider that's focused on the mass market rather than the high speed market. For larger organizations, that's where those tools like Informatica are available. There's another company that I found earlier today. It's called Freight, and it does do what Zapier does. It doesn't have all the connectors, but it seems to me that it could handle more stress. But it really comes down to, what is the enterprise trying to do? If the enterprise is okay with a few delays in the data movement, then Zapier might be fine. It could probably handle as much data as it needs to. It's just it won't be real time or millisecond frequency. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And a follow-up to that, obviously your demo was just a straightforward Slack to Trello. Can Zapier be used for, something like moving data from, say, Salesforce to HubSpot, so that perhaps somebody in my company can access their information faster? Or is Zapier usually reserved towards more like, I would say, smaller systems that are not as business focused?
I think it can do that. There's nothing wrong with it. Zapier's focus is ease of use rather than speed and power. And you may be able to do, let's say, simple integrations with Zapier just by pointing and clicking, and that may even have several steps. All right, but when you need to go change it, you always have to do it with points and clicks. When an organization becomes larger, there are more specialized jobs, and the person that's maintaining the zaps, they can probably do pretty much everything with Zapier. But if a technical person is in charge of an integration system like MuleSoft or Talend, the code to do something may be faster to implement if everything is set up in code than Zapier itself. Because instead of having 10 different zaps or 10 different steps in Zapier, you would essentially have 4 or 5 lines of code. There's such a gradient between something like Zapier and something like MuleSoft that it really depends. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to answer that question. It all comes down to, what is the criticality of moving information? My recommendation is you start with something like Cloud Pipes or Zapier or Cloud Pipes or Zapier. If it meets your needs and you continue to grow and you continue to start seeing the economy of scale of moving information with one system, then once you get to the limits of what Zapier can do, that's where you may have to start looking into other platforms like Elastic.io or Dell Boomi, where it starts to offer that speed and power. But it doesn't mean that you can't use Zapier. You can continue using Zapier for certain interactions and then use something else for more complex and more or other interactions that require more throughput.
Thank you, Earl. Makes sense.
Right. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday morning. We will be, we have recorded this webinar. We will be uploading it to YouTube and Vimeo and posting it on our blog. Please stay tuned. We have this is part of a long-term series on online software and running a modern enterprise, and looking forward to seeing you guys at the next webinar. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful weekend.